Hello and welcome to the AugSQL beta launch webinar. My name is Tim Rodman and it is my privilege to introduce AugSQL to you. This presentation will be in three parts. First, we'll talk about what AugSQL is and why it matters. Second, I'll give you a demo of AugSQL. And finally, we'll talk about how you can become a beta tester for AugSQL. Now, before we get into what AugSQL is and why it matters, I do have two quick housekeeping items to take care of. First, I wanted to let you know that this is a pre-recorded webinar since I wanted to give you something that's more polished than a live webinar. I will, though, be attending the webinar live and responding to your comments in the comment section on the bottom of the page. Second, speaking of comments, I will only be monitoring the comments that are posted on the bottom of the augforums.com/AugSQL beta launch page, which you can see displayed on your screen. If you are watching this on StreamYard, please don't put anything in the chat because I won't see it and it doesn't get saved, so it will be gone forever. If you are watching this on YouTube or LinkedIn, feel free to leave a comment there and I will respond eventually. But if you would like to interact with me live during the webinar, please use the comment section on the bottom of the augforums.com/AugSQL beta launch page, as you can see displayed here on the screen. All right, that's it for the housekeeping items. Now let's get started talking about what AugSQL is and why it matters. In one sentence, AugSQL is SQL for Acumatica, including Acumatica SaaS customers. Let me say that again. AugSQL is SQL for Acumatica, including Acumatica SaaS customers. Before we talk about why AugSQL matters, let's talk about why SQL matters. SQL was initially developed at IBM in the 1970s. Pronounced SQL, the SQL acronym stands for Structured Query Language. It hasn't changed much in recent years because there isn't much to change, but SQL continues to be the way to communicate with structured databases, including Microsoft SQL Server and MySQL, the two database engines supported by Acumatica. When it comes to data in ERP databases like Acumatica, SQL is just as relevant today as it was in the 1970s. Less than 2 months ago, Satya Nadella introduced Microsoft Fabric, a brand new product from Microsoft that they have been working on for years, calling it perhaps the biggest launch of a data product from Microsoft since SQL Server back in the early 1990s. Even though he's talking in the context of artificial intelligence, since AI is a hot trend these days, he mentions SQL together with machine learning when talking about analytics workloads, showing just how important SQL continues to be in 2023. Let's take a listen to this 1 minute and 15-second clip from that presentation.
And of course, all AI applications start with data. And we're really thrilled to be announcing Microsoft Fabric. This is a product that we've been working very, very hard on over multiple years, and it's finally coming together. It's perhaps the biggest launch of a data product from Microsoft since the launch of SQL Server. It really brings together compute and storage, so it unifies compute and storage. It unifies all of the full analytics stack product experiences. It brings together governance, so it unifies governance with analytics. And most interestingly, it unifies the business model, right, across all the different types of analytics workloads, whether they're SQL, machine learning, whatever job you want, you can use the same compute infrastructure. And this unification at the end of the day is what I think will fuel the next generation of AI applications. Let's roll the video.
SQL is not only important as a technology, it's also important because of its user community. First, when looking at the size of the community, let's compare SQL to Microsoft Excel, since Microsoft Excel formulas are the most popular programming language on the planet by far. I'm going to show some numbers and a chart on the screen to help you follow my reasoning. According to Bill Jelen, the creator of MrExcel.com and the guy who pioneered the idea of online forums for software products, there are 750 million Excel users on the planet. My friend Rob Colley, who used to work on the Excel team at Microsoft and who has traveled the globe talking extensively to Excel users, he says that 1 out of every 16 Excel users produces analysis in Excel. That means that for every 1 person who produces analysis in Excel, there are 15 people who are consuming it in Excel. So 750 million times 1/16 equals 46.9 million. So let's put that on a chart, since that's my estimate of the number of Excel programmers out there. Now let's try to calculate a total population of SQL programmers. As of March 2022, Stack Overflow had over 20 million registered users. So let's say that the total programmer population on the planet, excluding Excel, is 20 million people. In their 2021 technology survey, 47% of the Stack Overflow community voted SQL as the most popular programming language. 20 million times 47% equals 9.4 million. So let's also put that number on a chart. My estimate of the number of SQL programmers out there is a lot smaller than the number of Excel programmers, but not that much smaller, especially when you consider how massive of a user base Excel has compared to anything else. Now let's add one more number to the chart, the number of Acumatica developers out there. Acumatica recently reached 10,000 customers, much smaller than the Excel and SQL numbers we were working with. So they're growing, and I've been involved with their developer community for many years. I'm going to be very generous and say that there are 1,000 Acumatica developers out there, even though I know that the number of experienced Acumatica developers is significantly less than that. The number of Acumatica developers barely registers on the chart. So if you need help with custom reporting or custom programming in Acumatica, there aren't that many people out there who can help you. But there are tons of people out there who already know Excel and SQL. This chart is also interesting when you consider that Velixo, which is a reporting add-on for Microsoft Excel, is the most popular add-on product for Acumatica. Since my estimate of the SQL programmer population is about 20% of the size of the Excel programmer population, I'm thinking that AugSQL can be at least 20% as popular as Velixo. Velixo matters because Excel matters. AugSQL matters because SQL matters. AugSQL is SQL for Acumatica, including Acumatica SaaS customers. Now, let's move on to the second part of this webinar. I'd like to give you a demo of AugSQL. Let's take a look. After you publish the AugSQL customization project, like I've done here, you need to determine if you're running Acumatica locally or in a non-local environment. If you're running Acumatica locally, like I'm doing here, then AugSQL will just work. There is nothing further that you need to do. If running Acumatica in a non-local environment, like on the Acumatica cloud, then you'll need to register your instance by doing the following. First, go to Tools, About, and copy the installation ID to your clipboard. Next, head over to augforums.com/mylicenses, paste your installation ID, choose your purchase right here, and click Assign License. As soon as you see your installation ID appear on the screen here, you'll be able to use AugSQL in your Acumatica instance. Since I'm running on localhost for this demo, I'll just delete my installation ID since it's not needed. Once that's done, we can go into the AugSQL workspace on the left-hand side and launch the AugSQL screen. The screen is very simple currently. We have plans for adding additional functionality, but remember, AugSQL matters because SQL matters. And we can put whatever SQL code we want in this SQL command area here. Let's start off with a basic select statement. Let's do select star from customer. When we click the select button, we can see that the results of the SQL query are returned in the grid below, just like with a generic inquiry in Acumatica. Also, like with a generic inquiry, we can interact with the grid. We can move fields around. Maybe we want to move language ID further to the right, like this. We can sort on columns. Let's sort descending on the B account ID column, like this. And we can also see the total record count, 126 records in this case, just like with a generic inquiry. We can filter on columns. Let's filter on customer class ID equals local, which we can see returns only 96 records. And we can even export to Excel just like with a generic inquiry. If we save and open the Excel file, we can see that all of the data has been exported to an AugSQL sheet, which can be easily converted into a table like this to make it easier to work with. Since we have access to SQL, we can also do filtering and sorting in SQL instead of in the grid. Let's unfilter and unsort in the grid. As you can see, we're back to the original 126 records, and we aren't sorted on B account ID in descending order anymore. Then let's try filtering in SQL by adding the following where clause. Where customer class ID equals local. You can also turn off the spell checker like that. When we run this, we're now at 96 records, the same as when we did the filtering within the grid. We can also add an order by clause to once again sort descending on B account ID by doing order by B account ID and then putting DESC for descending. Click select and we're now sorted descending on B account ID. Pretty cool, huh? But we're just getting started. We can also select which columns we'd like to see by replacing the star with a list of columns that we want. So let's do company ID, B account ID, customer class ID, and terms ID. When we click select, now we only see the 4 columns that we requested. But what if we wanted to also see the customer ID and the customer name? If we were creating a generic inquiry, we'd have that information in the customer data access class. But since AugSQL is bypassing the data access classes and directly accessing the Acumatica database, we need to join over to the B account table. Before we do that, I want to point out that Acumatica is a multi-tenant solution. When you're on the main Acumatica login screen, you select which tenant you'd like to log into. You can see that I've got 2 tenants, Sales Demo and New Tenant. When you're logged in, if you have access to multiple tenants like I do here, you can toggle between those tenants in the upper right-hand corner. When you're in a tenant in the Acumatica application, you only have access to the data in that tenant, including when you're doing reporting. But the data from all of the tenants is stored in the same database. So with AugSQL, we have access to the data from all the tenants. Tenant is a much better name for sales demo and new tenant that you see here. But when I first started working with Acumatica many years ago, these were called companies, not tenants. Now, company means something entirely different in the Acumatica application, but because it would be a huge pain to change the database column names, the company ID columns in the database actually refer to what tenant each record belongs to. The point of that history lesson is so you'll know that the company ID that we see here is actually the tenant. And when we join tables together, we should always include company ID in the join to make sure that we don't mix data from one tenant with data from another tenant. So let's join to the B account table and include the company ID column in the join. As we do that, I'm also going to alias the tables to make it easier to refer to them by short names. I'll use C and B instead of having to type their full names every time. So we'll do as C for this table, capital C. Then we'll do a left outer join to B account as B. And we'll make sure that we include company ID in the join. And then the primary key, which is B account ID. And then we'll make sure to refer to the correct table in our existing columns, like this. When we run this query, the results look the same as they did before. But now we're set up to add in the customer ID and customer name columns from the B account table, which I can refer to with the letter B. So we'll do B.account ID for the customer ID and B.account name for the customer name. Click select, and now we see those columns in the grid below. Isn't that cool? We're pulling in columns from multiple tables into our results grid. Speaking of tenants, if you want to see how many tenants are in the database, you can run a simple statement like this. We'll do select star from company, which is actually tenant. And here we see that there are two regular tenants in our Acumatica database, sales demo and new tenant. The tenant with a company ID of 1 is a hidden tenant, which you can think of as a template tenant that contains a bunch of system configuration data, such as a list of countries and states. We can get a quick count of how many state records there are, California, Ohio, etc., in each tenant with this query. We'll do select company ID, count star, give it a name, call it records, get it from the state table, and we'll group by company ID. We'll click select. And these results make sense because I added one custom state to my tenant before this demo. So one record is stored in my tenant number 2, while the other state records are being retrieved from the hidden template tenant. Now, here's an interesting query to run if you're curious to see what version of Microsoft SQL Server your Acumatica SaaS instance is running on. We can do select @ version. We'll give it a name, MySQL Server version. We'll click select, And we can see in this case, I'm just running locally, but I'm running on 2019. I do want to point out here that AugSQL only supports Microsoft SQL Server. We don't have any plans at this point to support MySQL, so I'm sorry to all my friends down under who are using MYOB in Australia, since MYOB runs on MySQL. Now, the database also stores information about the tables in the database. We can do something similar to what the DAX schema browser in Acumatica allows you to do by searching through the list of table names in the database. Let's say that we weren't sure what the table name was for states, but we were pretty sure that it started with the word state. We could run this query to see all tables that begin with state. Select star from sys.tables, where name like state. The percentage is a wildcard, so this is a begins with statement. We click select. It looks like there are two of them, including the one that we used in our query earlier. We can even search across all column names. I'm going to paste in this query since it's kind of long, but here's a query that allows us to search for all columns that contain inventory ID in their name, but only if they belong to a table with a table name that starts with IN. We can click select, and now we're looking at all tables that start with IN that have a column with inventory ID in the column name. Pretty cool, huh? At this point, I think this is a good time to mention the AugSQL community forum. You're probably already familiar with the forums on augforums.com, where you're watching this webinar. Well, now there is a new forum down here for AugSQL. And here's an example of a post that shares the SQL code that we just used. We recently added a cool plugin on the forums that understands the SQL language and highlights certain things in bold or red, like you see here, when you post SQL code to make it easier to read. The point here is that you can share Acumatica SQL code with others in the AugSQL forum, which is really powerful. Currently, the AugSQL, right up here, the AugSQL forum is available to anyone with a free account on augforums.com, but we will be locking this down in the future so that only paying AugSQL customers have access to the AugSQL forum. I'm really looking forward to seeing what cool things people post in the AugSQL forum, and I hope to post some cool things myself. All right, so far all of the SQL queries that we've run have used select statements, but AugSQL does not limit what kind of SQL code you can run. You can run select statements, update statements, delete statements, create statements, drop statements, etc. This can be dangerous because you can completely destroy your Acumatica database by, for example, dropping all of the tables in the database. But you can already do that by publishing an Acumatica customization project that contains SQL code. So AugSQL isn't enabling anything that isn't already possible. The thing to keep in mind is that AugSQL is very powerful, and with great power comes great responsibility. Let's look at some examples of SQL queries that do more than just select data from the database. Here I'm looking at purchase order 1781, but there's a problem. All of the lines on the purchase order have been completed and closed, but the purchase order status is stuck in open. This doesn't happen very often, but I personally have seen it happen multiple times in various Acumatica environments. If you don't have AugSQL, then you'd have to open a support case with Acumatica to ask them to fix the purchase order. If you don't have an Acumatica support contract, then you'd have to pay your VAR to open the support case for you. If you have AugSQL, you can fix it yourself. First, let's run a query to see the status of the purchase order. We'll do select company ID, order, NBR, and status from PO order, where company ID equals 2, which is the tenant that we're in, and order number equals PO 001781. If we click select, we'll see that the status is set to the letter N. If we go back to the purchase order and do inspect element on the status field, we can click the drop-down values and we can see that the letter N means open. But we want to set this purchase order to a status of closed. So scrolling down, we can see that C is the code for closed. So we can go back to AugSQL. We can comment out our select line with 2 dashes and replace it with update. And let's see, I'll do like this. Update PO order, and we'll set the status to C for closed. When we press exec, AugSQL runs the update statement. Now we can remove our update line. Actually, I'll just replace it with from, put that back in place, and uncomment our select line. Let's run that, and we can see that the status is now C. Going back to the purchase order, close this down. We were open, but we can refresh this, and we can see that it's now closed, which is what we wanted. Awesome. Now let's try something that's even more scary than an update statement. Let's try a delete statement. There are certain things in Acumatica that don't actually get deleted when you delete them. They just get hidden from the Acumatica application. Stock items are one of those things. So let's head over to the stock item screen. Here we are looking at a test stock item in Acumatica. There are no transactions that reference this item, so Acumatica will allow us to delete it. If we go back to AugSQL, we can see the test item in the database. Let's do select company ID, inventory CD. We'll get the description, and we'll get a column called deleted database record. We'll get that from inventory item, where company ID equals 2 and inventory CD equals test. If we click select, we can see that the deleted database, there it is, the deleted database record column is set to false for the test item. The deleted database record column is how Acumatica keeps track of whether or not this item is deleted and whether or not it should be shown in the Acumatica application. Let's go back to the stock item screen and delete this item. Now, if we try to search for it, it can't be found in the Acumatica application. If we go back to AugSQL and click select again, we can see that the item is still in the database, but the deleted database record column has now been set to true, which is how the Acumatica application knows to keep it hidden from the user interface. If we want to remove the test item from the database completely, we can comment out our select line and replace it with a delete line like this. Clicking exec runs the delete statement. Now, when we run the select statement again, let's get rid of this and uncomment that, click select, we can see that test no longer exists in the database because there's no results. This is very powerful, but as I mentioned before, with great power comes great responsibility. So please make sure that you are very comfortable with SQL before attempting update or delete statements. Now, I could go on and on with additional examples that demonstrate the amazing things that you can do with AugSQL. But for the sake of time, I'll just show you one more example, which is particularly powerful when it comes to reporting. Acumatica allows you to connect a data access class to a SQL view, which allows you to use that SQL view in a generic inquiry, in Report Designer, or on a dashboard for reporting purposes. That's all great, but building the SQL view is a pain because you have to build it in a development environment where you don't have up-to-date data. With AugSQL, you can build the SQL view in your live environment using your live data. Then you can still build the customization project in a development environment for connecting the SQL view to a data access class. You would publish the customization project after working hours to get the data access class piece in place, but use AugSQL to build the SQL view during working hours, which saves you a ton of time and is a much more pleasant experience. Let's paste in our SQL statement from earlier, which showed us some information about our customers, and click Select to see the results again. Now let's add a create view line like this. Create view my customer info as, to turn this into a SQL view, and remove the order by line right here, since SQL views don't allow order by. After clicking exec to create the SQL view, let's select everything from our new My Customer Info view. So we'll just do a select star from our new view. Click the select button, and we now see the same information. Very cool, right? We essentially packaged our more complicated SQL logic into a SQL view, making it easier to use. We can even look at the definition of the SQL view using the following command. We can do sp_help text, click select, and see the definition of the SQL view here. This way, we don't have to keep a copy of our SQL view code somewhere. We can simply pull it out of the database using the sp_help text command whenever we need it. We could use a similar technique to package complex SQL logic into a stored procedure. I'm actually working with a client right now and using AugSQL to build a stored procedure that runs a customized replenishment solution. Bottom line, there are lots of possibilities. Hopefully that demo got you thinking of some ideas. In my opinion, with AugSQL, the possibilities are endless. Right now, Acumatica is very popular, and it can be difficult to find qualified consultants or developers who have the bandwidth to work on things for you. AugSQL saves you from having to rely entirely on the limited Acumatica developer ecosystem and allows you to tap into what is already a very large population of SQL programmers. It's very likely that you already have someone at your company who knows SQL. AugSQL is SQL for Acumatica, including Acumatica SaaS customers. Now, I'd like to finish off this webinar with our third and final section, talking about how you can become a beta tester for AugSQL. This past January, I was in San Diego before and after the Acumatica Summit. Since the Acumatica Summit was in Las Vegas and I enjoy driving, especially in the desert, I drove to the Acumatica Summit. On my drive back to San Diego from Las Vegas, as I was driving across the desert, the idea for AugSQL popped into my head. The more I thought about it, the more I like the idea. I'm not a developer though, so I partnered with an Acumatica developer that I've known for years, someone who has a lot of experience developing in the Acumatica framework, and someone that I trust. What you saw today is the first public look into what we've been working on for the past few months. I hope you liked it. I've already been using AugSQL at a client site for a couple of months now, and it's gone really well. So my partner and I felt that AugSQL is at the point where we're ready to launch to 15 beta testers. We do have a list of feature ideas that we'd like to add to AugSQL in the future. I'll just mention 3 of them. First, the ability to save SQL code and run that saved SQL code on a schedule using an automation schedule in Acumatica. Second, layered in on top of the scheduler, the ability to automatically publish the result set output as a CSV file in OneDrive so that it can be easily consumed by Power BI without needing to create a separate data warehouse database. And third, the ability to pass parameters to a save SQL query in the URL and add security so that save SQL query, similar to adding an import scenario to the sitemap in Acumatica, so that those with proper security permissions can execute that SQL query using a hyperlink. But even though we have some cool feature ideas for the future, we felt that what we have now is good enough for a beta launch. Today, I'm happy to announce that we are opening AugSQL to 15 lucky beta testers on a first-come, first-served basis. The price of AugSQL is $9.99 per year, $1 shy of $1,000. But beta testers will get 50% off the first year. That's right, not only do you get the privilege of using AugSQL before anyone else and the ability to provide early feedback that shapes the future of the product, but you also get 50% off the first year. The way that we are licensing AugSQL is kind of unique, so I want to take a couple of minutes to explain it. At the $9.99 per year price point, we can't afford to have a support staff with a 24/7 support phone number and an official support service level agreement. We are being transparent that this is a side project at this point, run by 2 people, but 2 people who, including me, are very passionate about it. The fact is that many Acumatica ISV products are staffed similarly, they just aren't as transparent about it. We will be supporting AugSQL entirely through the AugSQL community forum. This is where you can ask questions, report bugs, request features, etc. Legally, we are not selling AugSQL as an official software product. Rather, we are selling it as a training course that includes access to the AugSQL customization project. Your training course license will give you the ability to use the AugSQL customization project in as many local host environments as you'd like. For regular environments though, your license is limited to 1 Acumatica instance. In the future, we'll add the ability for you to purchase additional licenses for additional Acumatica instances. The AugSQL training course will include access to the community forum, video training content, and private live broadcasts, actually live, not recorded broadcasts like the one you're watching now. Selling AugSQL as a training course allows us to limit our liability, especially since, as I've mentioned, with great power comes great responsibility. And there is the potential that some people might cause some damage to their Acumatica database using AugSQL. But as I also mentioned, I've already been using AugSQL at a client site, and it's gone very well. The concept is actually very simple. You can already run SQL using a customization project. We're just making it easier. So that's my fully transparent, non-salesy pitch. And I do want you to know that my partner and I are very dedicated to the success of AugSQL. So with that, I'm going to end this webinar with the URL that you can use to purchase the AugSQL training course for 50% off the $9.99 per year purchase price. For technical reasons, the way it's working right now is a little weird. You actually see a purchase price of $50,000, but you'll use a coupon code that will make the purchase price $499. Once 15 people have used the coupon code will expire. So if you don't get in fast enough, please don't charge your credit card for $50,000. Just wait for us to collect feedback from the 15 beta testers and come back for the public launch of AugSQL when the annual price will be $9.99. The URL will display at the end of this video for about a minute, so you'll have plenty of time to write it down, get over to the URL, and follow the instructions there. Don't move too slowly though, because the coupon code will only work for the first 15 people. Thank you so much for attending this webinar, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day. Take care.